I will turn it over to Mr. Heumann. I want to say thank you again, Mr. Heumann, for working these many months on this project. I appreciate you taking this as a volunteer position. Unlike the City Council, you don't get paid big bucks like we do up here. But Mr. Heumann, I think, was appropriate for this job, mainly because of his experience and decades of civic leadership. Two things were pointed out I think are important. One, he was really one of the fathers of DART, and DART would not have gotten off the ground making sure every community was involved. And the way that plan was put together took a lot of compromise and partnership and leadership. And secondly, understanding neighborhoods, not only in the attempt to get North Central done, but what he's done with Jubilee Park with many others there, but he was a great leader there. So thank you for what you've done already, and the microphone's yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor, and ladies and gentlemen of the council. I appreciate the time that you're giving, and Mayor, I appreciate the honor you asking me to perform in this function. First slide, please. Can I see that? Okay, good deal. So imagine Fair Park, and these are the principal elements. Fair Park becomes one of the premier parks in the nation, if not the world. State Fair remains the best and the largest state fair in the nation. Other events, activities, and uses provide increased time and space or allowed to expand and thrive. Private funding augments and actually exceeds the public funding, but first that public funding has to come. And then finally, the bicentennial celebration is held right here in Dallas and not in San Antonio or Austin or Houston, which competed with us in the 1936 time period. This plan is a community vision. It is not a single plan. It is not a single person's vision. That will be developed over time. That's the way we do things in the community and should be done. Next slide, please. Okay, so we want to talk here about the three-year planning process. We have been involved in a careful, inclusive, and transparent activity. Let me go back in time, and I want to go back even further than the Mayor's Task Force. In 1996, I chaired the Science Place, and to the best of my knowledge, we had the sole new expansion of any facility in Fair Park. We had the IMAX theater and the entire wing. At that time, the two main donors mentioned to me, where is the City of Dallas in funding Fair Park? I had no answer. In 2001, I made a presentation to the council and to officials of State Fair and others, basically saying we have three deficiencies in Fair Park. We don't have adequate funding, we have a poor management structure, and there's no marketing. Nothing happened. The Hargraves plan was engaged in 2003. They did a great job. They had multiple community meetings, and I was privileged to be part of that process. They came out with a report. The council approved it. The park board approved it. The Landmark Commission approved it. 2003. Today, it's 2016. Not one single thing has been done to implement that plan. And then you've heard the chronology of the Mayor's Task Force, the numerous meetings that they were held, and that was basically approved by the park board, reviewed by the council, numerous public meetings. And then the foundation was asked to be involved. We got this activity began, and I've had personally about 250 meetings with organizations, individuals, and others, and more to come. How long do we have to wait to do what we need to do? Look, change is extremely difficult, especially if money is involved. No one likes to spend money, but look at the results of our inaction over the last 3 to 4 decades. Go out there at Fair Park and see how many new projects have come in, how many new donors have provided funding for Fair Park. What about those old priceless treasures in those buildings? What are their conditions? There's no unified management, and there's not adequate funding. And consequently, museums have gone, events have gone, buildings have deteriorated. Time is now. This is not selecting a specific plan. That is done by consensus in the community. It's getting the tools to implement plans. Management, financing. 2 things. Everything that I have had the privilege of being involved in, the desegregation case creating the magnet schools, as I mentioned, Dart, Central, Jubilee Park, and others, all basically involved a consensus development. That's what I like to do, getting different people together, working as a team, and forming a consensus. Not one person's plan. It's a group plan. Now, if the foundation is approved, all the plans will be considered, and there have been a lot that have been authored over the last 4 or 5 months, but the community has got to be involved, period, paragraph. And we've got to follow the Hargrave principles. This is an excellent master plan that you all commissioned and that was paid for. Now, I can't imagine why anyone wouldn't want to provide the tools to make it possible to develop a consensus plan for Fair Park. I just can't. It's beyond me. Next, please. Okay, so vision. Fair Park today, under Envisions, we want to implement a master plan. It's under Managed. We want to add and have added a first-class board and new talent to the current staff. It's under Invested. I'll get to that in a few minutes. Under Marketed, there is no marketing for overall Fair Park. Disorganized. There was a great little quip in a letter that I received recently, and he reminded me about the incident at Science Place. We had a front door problem. The problem was one group in the city handled the exterior of doors. Another group in the city handled the interior part of the door. And so there was a loggerhead. And I mentioned at the last presentation, the lagoon. We did not get clean. We finally had to use volunteers to clean the lagoon. So we have basically a private, we have a public operation trying to manage a very complex organism. Lack of neighborhood involvement. I guess you could really put that and put exclamation points. So we have 2 choices. One choice, the status quo, kick the financing down the road as we've done the last 30 years, or provide the tools of management and financing so we'll have a viable new vision for Fair Park. Leadership is the absolute key. I feel very proud and very honored that we've had 9 individuals who have agreed to serve on the board, and we had an additional level serve an additional 11 individuals serving on the advisory board to give additional expertise and representation. And then we have the Leadership Council. That is made up of the institutions within Fair Park because they have a seat at the table and they need to be heard. We have an excellent staff of city employees. And finally, we're going to be seeking a new CEO for Fair Park. Next, please. You've seen this before, but now it's filled in. And when I was at the council on November the 18th, here was my hope for and promise. We'd try to have a triracial board, and we'd have 5 of the 9 board members female because females have been underrepresented in Fair Park throughout its entire history. And that's exactly what you have up there in that top board of directors. In addition to that, we have 2 individuals from the surrounding community and 1 individual from the historical preservation area. But we created an advisory board. Didn't need to do that. No one asked that to get additional representation. And so those 4 boxes to the left are individuals that actually live and work in the surrounding community. Jubilee Park, Mill City, Dolphin Heights. The next two, we've added 2 additional historical preservation individuals. We've added a professional from the architectural group, Andy Swift, who is recognized in this nation for his soccer marketing skills and so forth, to help us fill that cotton bowl that is underutilized. And we have a representative that has been heavily involved with the creation of the Dart Line coming out here. And finally, 2 representatives from the Leadership Council, that's that bottom group of all the institutions that operate in Fair Park. So with that, I've said, you all and your predecessors created a very complex organization. Institutions out there with long-term, no-cut contracts. And that's what we've inherited. And so what we're trying to do with that organization chart that some of you kiddingly described in different ways, but that was my attempt to unify the management of what we are faced with and to have them work as a team rather than as 40 to 50 independent fiefdoms. Next, please. So I'm going to talk a little about 7 strategies. 1, add green space. 2nd, create new uses for buildings and park space in Fair Park. Work with the community. Next, please. Preserve historic treasures. Attract more people through marketing. Improve transportation and access. And continue improving through strategic planning. Next, please. Okay. I'd like to repeat for the record. The foundation and I personally am not interested in just fixing up old buildings. I'm going to repeat that. The foundation, nor Walt Heumann, is interested in just fixing up old buildings. What we are doing and we are about is trying to create synergism and new and exciting things. So when the park board was kind enough to ask me what my thoughts were, I caveated those thoughts by saying, this is just one person, but it's got to go through a community planning process and get the professionals involved. But I suggested a community park. We called it a family park, a grand park, right there along Cullum Boulevard. And we are committed that separate and apart from trying to address problems in Fair Park, to make that our number 1 priority. Number 1, do it right away, as fast as we can. Now, that park has been described as a postage stamp sized park. Well, it's 60 to 70% larger than Clybourne Park, and I run a calculation, and it is 50 million times larger than a 1-inch square postage stamp. So just think about that. All right, we want the best ideas, and the agreement, we're committed to the 1 year trying to get the conceptual plan, but there is something indefinable about creativity. And you're just on the cusp of finalizing and freezing the design, and someone else comes out of the blue and says, but have you thought about doing it this way? And it makes all the difference. So, committed to the 1 year conceptual plan, but we got to do it right. We got to have money, we got to have professional input, and most important, we've got to have the community input. This is not about fixing up old buildings. It's about creating new, exciting things in that park. Now, you say, well, you can stand up here and talk all you want about this priority. What have you got to show to prove that you did that? Go to Jubilee Park, which is just to the north of Fair Park. The very first thing that we did in Jubilee Park was build a park, and now is an award-winning park. It's the center. It's the heartbeat of that community. So my heart is in the right place, and that's why we're going to get this done. Next, please. Now, I want at the end of the process for you all to put to rest this comment about only interested in old buildings, because the other thing the park board allowed me to do was talk about the bigger issue of Fair Park and what would be done there. This is not the start, this is not the end, that community or family or grand park. And so I want to point out some, well, I can't, this thing doesn't work up there, but let me just set the stage. Fair Park to the north, that is the Jubilee Park area. To the southeast is the Dolphin Heights and Mill City. To the southwest is the MLK area. Those are important, critical communities that abound Fair Park. And so what I'd like to do, first of all, is talk about what it takes to build a signature park. Open spaces, active recreation, and one thing is critical that this report criticizes us is that we don't have enough recreational activities for kids. This is where I played basketball growing up, in the automobile building. And you don't have much of that anymore. We want special uses, entertainment, education, revenue generating, partnerships, not only in the community but also with businesses. We want to develop a physical plan that is a consensus plan. But the caveat on these prior plans, no one ever mentioned how you are going to fund it. And so we stuck our neck out and we said specifically, here's what needs to be done. So let's start with the customer or the visitor or the general public to Fair Park. How do we get those people to Fair Park? Well, we want to make sure that they can easily walk, bike, the trails, the Santa Fe Trail going from your upper left to the right, connecting up to White Rock Lake. DART, we've spent a lot of time in creating DART. We should use that to the maximum extent. There's no reason why we can't get people during lunchtime to come out to Fair Park for a quiet lunch, or conventions when they come in town, or use DART when they want to enjoy Fair Park and basically don't want to park. There's the car, Uber, Lyft, and make it more accessible and customer friendly. Now what I mean by that, an app that tells you where to park if I'm coming to the music hall for a performance at night. I will talk a little about parking lots, but let me dwell on three key things. If you look at the upper part of that chart, you have East Grand that dead ends before Fair Park. We need to connect that major corridor, and in a separate request that I'm making to this city council, in your street budget for your bond program, allocate $10 million for upgrading East Grand. Why? It'll help that corridor and the businesses. Number two, there's no easy access for all those residents in Jubilee Park to get to Fair Park without going through the dangerous area crossing the DART rail line and so forth. And third, it provides another entrance into Fair Park. Secondly, another $10 million in your street funds to finish the job on MLK and L. Lipscomb Way, because that can be the grand entrance as you come off of 45. It's not done yet. They need $10 million, and we need $5 million because you've got a drainage system that was put in the 1930s that handles 5-year flood states, and we've had 2 75-year flood events just in the last year. So what you do by doing that is you relieve the bottleneck that exists right now at 2nd Avenue and Perry. Next, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the parking lots. They occupy 65% of all the space, and that's got to change. And so within funding and operational means, we want to do everything possible to convert as much of that that space, those parking lots, to green space. Most of the lots are underutilized, but here's the key thing. No one can show me any data on how much that particular lot is used during the day, during the week, during the time of the year. That's very important because some lots are so underutilized that they might be converted for other uses. The area around Fitzhugh is just a sea of parking lots. That can be changed, should be changed. In addition, the museum green and the what they call the music green, that's along Cullen Boulevard. The commitment is to turn that totally into green lots. It's a complex issue, though. Yes, sir. It's a complex issue, and it doesn't lend itself very easily to quick solutions. But we can get through and win-win solutions on this parking lot situation. I have a list here of about 25 projects of people that have contacted me and that would like to get involved in Fair Park. A basketball and volleyball and batting cage like is so successful in North Dallas and Southwest Dallas. Those things. These are the notes that I gave to the park board. I'd like to share them with the council because they're very important. What they show is that basically our heart's in the right place. There's a lot of things that can be done, should be done. And with that, I want to just close. Next slide. Is that it takes seed capital to develop new projects. Okay, number 3, work with the community. Fair Park should be a springboard for positive change that goes on in the community. Period, paragraph. That is axiomatic. Establish a planning process. Involve the councilwoman who oversees this district, Tiffany Young, the advisory board trustees, and the WINS board, and create a neighborhood coalition that basically conducts design charrettes that determine what we actually put in these various components in park. Establish job training and job employment. But it needs your help, Mayor, and it needs the council's help. Fair Park cannot do this alone. We've got a lot of challenges, but what we want is growth without gentrification. Next slide, please. Number 4, preserve historic treasures. The Alamo and the Art Deco buildings are the 2 prized treasures in all of the state of Texas. We have existing assets that, not due to your neglect, but your predecessors, we should have been spending $5 to $10 million more a year in Fair Park. Then we wouldn't be talking about this. You'd have more private capital that would already come in there. And so what we did was we took the $240 million worth of identified projects that you need to take the assets that you've got there now. This is not new projects. It is the existing needs inventory that was done by AECOM. And I would point out that you've got almost $32 million of items that should have been done decades ago. This is security, safety, ADA problems, lose key treasures because rain falls in on some of the material. They should have set an endowment up when they did the buildings in 1936. In Jubilee Park, when we built the community center and the police substation, we did just that. Fortunately, we were able to raise an additional 20%, but that wasn't done, nor was the funding to Fair Park indexed to inflation. So you have what you have. This needs inventory has nothing to do with regular products, but this identifies, and I sent to all the council and to the park board members, that detailed study made by AECOM. Next, please. Marketing. I don't need to dwell on this except to say what I mentioned to you on November the 18th. We have 5 myths about Fair Park that need to be dispelled. Myth 1, it's unsafe. It is not. It is one of the safest areas. Jubilee Park is one of the safest zip codes in Dallas. Inside Fair Park, it is far safer than some North Dallas major mall areas. But that's not the perception. We've got to overcome that. Next, it's inaccessible. How more accessible do you want? It's got 2 major highways and 2 DART stations, not just one. It's not clean. It is clean. But if you don't have the staff during the non-state fair time, it's hard to keep it clean. Third, what about the neighborhoods around it? Go to Jubilee Park. See what Anna Hill and Andrea Lyons has done to Mill City and Dolphin Heights. Those projects are on the move, so we shouldn't hang our head, but there's more to be done. The 80th anniversary brought out a lot of new customers and visitors to Fair Park. Next, please. Improve transportation and access. The other thing that I would add that I didn't mention earlier is a circulator. Because if we're going to get you to come to DART and we let you off the MLK station, you're probably not going to walk in the rain or if it's really hot or really cold. So we've got to think about a circulator system to make it user-friendly. And those parking lots need to have a user app. We need to prioritize them. Maybe you can park free way over here, or if you want to valet park, you pay more, etc. Parking lots occupies 65% of Fair Park. Next, please. Final strategy, continue improving through a strategic plan. A balanced approach between consensus planning and financial feasibility, that's what we need. The last thing we would ever consider, last thing we do, is not having massive public input before we freeze plans and designs. So gather the input, analyze it, conceptualize the design, then raise the money and get after it. But also think about endowment, so we don't make the same mistakes they made in 1936. Next, please. Management fee. It always comes down to the money. Right now, the city of Dallas is putting about $11+ million into Fair Park. If you multiply that by 20 years, that's $222 million that you all are going to spend, or more with inflation, or if we have 3 major events like we've already had this year, where water lines break, where the chiller in the aquarium goes out, or whether the Black Rodeo has a problem because the air conditioning went out. So the foundation is proposing $16.7 to $22.7 million. And we asked that of you on November the 18th, a much larger number. And I had a budget that basically justified that. And where that money was going to go to was new project development. Who's going to build a road along the northern boundary called the Fair Park Boulevard, landscape it and integrate it with the plant? It's going to be very difficult to do that with private funding only. Need some public money. There is no admission fee charged in Fair Park. None. That's not the case with the Arboretum or the zoo. So that is the main difference about needing significant funding. And Fair Park is a much more complex organization. So we're asking for an increase of 5.6 to 11.6 million. And I would like to remind those that have come up with numbers of 600 billion, 800, 1 billion, 1.2 billion is the cost of this. Each year, you determine in your budgetary process whether you're going to fund that management fee. If anything, that's an advantage to you, but it's a detriment in terms of long-term financial planning for the foundation. Next, please. Okay, this is a nitty-gritty chart, but basically what I tried to do is show what it's going to be like in 2017, and then because the park board, when I was out of town, they cut back that year 2020 by $2 million. So I cut this off at 2019 at only 20.7 million, but I hope and pray that we get that reinstated with CPI. But this shows you that even with that enhanced budget in 2019, only $3 million are allocated to new projects. And I have for contingencies down at the very bottom about $2 million for needed projects where the air conditioning system goes out, or there aren't public funds available yet or in sufficient quantity. So that's the overall budget we have, and it's been there, and it's been submitted to the city. They reviewed it, and that's why they penciled this in, and that's been there for months. Finally, the next slide, the capital plans. This is an extremely important point. And what I had suggested originally is first $25 million the city puts up, and that goes for security, safety, and those critical items. Well, that number is $32 million, so already we have a gap. So if you were to ask the question, what are you going to do with increased funding? We've got a challenge right there on the front end in terms of timing. But so $75 million would be raised by the city, $50 million matching by the foundation, and the foundation would spend that money on new projects and other, but The city's money would only go on existing buildings and projects. And I would like to make the formal request again, Mr. Mayor, $25 million in your streets budget for East Grand and for MLK and those corridor streets, and for $5 million for the flood. And once again, this is subject to city annual approval and voter approval. Next part. Finally, we're ready to start work, hopefully in August 29 with this briefing, and that you will call for a vote sometime this month. With that, we'd sign a management agreement, and then we'd try to hustle to do the transition work, accounting systems and HR systems and all the rest of that, and hit the ground running on January 1. Foundation. And then in 2017, we have developed the strategic plan with public input and so forth, and then we have our marching orders and can go forward. And with that, thank you for the opportunity to speak. And if you don't mind, I'll just sit down and
Please.
take questions, or maybe field them from here, but if it requires some material that I can refer over here. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Human. We will open it up for comments, questions. Okay, thank you very much. Meeting's adjourned. Okay.
Great.
Oh, you guys, oh, you do want to talk. Okay, there we go.
No one wanted to go first.
Mr. Callahan.
Well, that's
Yeah.
unusual, me going first. I usually go last, but so I was afraid you were going to cut us off and adjourn the meeting, so I thought I'd better get my act together. I first want to say, Mayor, thank you for your leadership, and I earnestly mean that. There's really many others to thank, Mr. Human, and I know the park board, my park board member, many others, but your leadership with the direction that we've been taking this has really been key. And I want to make it clear right up front that I'm in support of the Park Board recommendation of pursuing a privatization agreement for Fair Park. To me, it just makes sense. I mean, it's a park for all of the people. It just really has a nice ring to it. And the recommendations that's been made, with the, I can list them here, management, maintenance, and operation, marketing of Fair Park. That's really what it's all about. I think... obviously, it's always going to be challenging to get enough money, and to do there'll never be enough money. But I think the fact is that we've got a strategic plan in place. Goes a long way. And I've been here my whole life, born in Dallas. Many of you know that, and raised in Mesquite, just miles away. But my fondest memories are going to that Fair Park, and I have some great memories and some of the great features that used to be there that are even no longer there, but it's always had my attention, and I've always told everybody, if I were to have only one day, if I were to pick you up at the airport and go, show me Dallas, I would make sure that probably the first place that I drove from DFW or Love Field would be to Fair Park. That's just, I have that kind of a love affair, and Craig, I know you have that love affair too. You grew up in Dallas, and many of us that grew up here, it was just when it was fair season, I got my lawn mowing money together. I kept in a brass cup, and I counted how much I had because I'm going to the fair. It was a great place to go. But I've watched over the years, and my beautiful Fair Park, it's had improvements, fits and starts over time, but I've just watched it deteriorate to the point where it's not really the same place. Some things have been improved, but many things have not been improved. But I would love to see us go forward and just have this new envisionment. I think that's really what I think the citizens really want. I think everything is here, too, the business inclusion and diversity plan. Those that are opposed to the privatization, they say, why rush? First off, who says it has been? I mean, really. This fair is 130 years old, and we've been talking about this, I guess, since I've been on council, Mayor, and I'm sure you probably had some ideas before that. But I don't see any reason to wait any longer. The fair is even older than 130. I think we have a North Texas Agriculture Fair, and I was doing a little research over the weekend. Even Doc Holliday, I think he won 3 dental awards over there, the famed gambler and, dentist that was at 56 Elm Street in Dallas. So we have a lot of history in this city, and I think the fair is just so emblematic of that. So, it's taken 2 to 3 years to get to this point. Mr. Human, I really admire what you've done and those working with you have done. And I really think that we've come up with a good plan. And I think, privatization leads to a new vision. And a newer, smaller board quickens the approval process. I think we all recognize that. And then those 9 clearly represent, diversity, inclusion, and plus a lot of talent. Then also those on the 11-member advisory board is more of the same. It's very diverse, lots of talent, and it's very inclusive. And it really enhances and seeks to build a signature park. We're just not talking about doing some lightweight lifting here. We're really talking about doing some great things. I love the fact that, it enhances the access, through DART and pedestrian and bicycle access, extra ways to get into the park. I would love to see a streetcar come right down to Exposition. That's the way things used to be. Signage will improve. Marketing will be enhanced. More dollars there for that community engagement. I've seen that from day one. A better balanced strategic plan and also a way to get more money in the park. I think we loosen those strings. We get this 9-member board working together. Takes the fear factor away. I know many in the philanthropic community, they're concerned about if I put my money in the hopper right now, the city of Dallas will kind of gobble it all up in a general operating budget. Well, not so if we have it, dedicated to this signature park. I'll close with just saying I think the plan is bold. I think the plan is insightful. It's creative. It's strategic. A lot of listening has been done. There's been a lot of meetings, Lord, lots of meetings. Lots of time has been spent, and a lot of goals have been set. And really all we need is the approval and let this group go to work, Mayor. That's what I would like to see. Time is of the essence. The buildings, as we speak, they're dripping with water. We've got old air conditioners. We've got old parking lots. We need wayfinding. We need a lot of stuff over there. But I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this. There's really no reason to wait. Let's get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Mr. Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's nice to see you again, Mr. Human. So I think most on this council can agree that status quo isn't good enough. Sorry. You mentioned that you wanted to dispel a notion that all you wanted to do is fix old buildings, and that you said that the number one priority is to do the green space, to do the signature park. Where because I can't find it, where specifically is it in your budget or in the contract that we've been provided that you're already allocating money towards the signature park?
Okay, so the question was, where in the budget is the what I call seed capital money for that park?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have the budget available? Let me just mention that all we have in the year 2017 is $250,000. That's all that has been identified for that. So we're going to have to try to get a lot of volunteer and pro bono help to help flange up that conceptual plan. Normally, we should have $3 or $4 million.
Oh, okay, just in the interest of time, so $250,000. Okay.
Did that answer your question?
No, sir. Well, yes, sir, it does that. You also listed your capital inventory needs and what, if you got your $75 million in the bond program, what you would spend it on. So there's priority 1, there's priority 2, priority 3, priority 4.
Right.
How much of the $75 million, if you get your money, if you get your $75 million in bond funds, how much of the $75 million is your board going to guarantee towards the development of a signature park?
The city is putting up $75 million in bonding, and that will not go at all. None of those funds would go to the family park or the Grand Park that we're talking about. The Grand Park would be financed 100% by outside non-city donations, except if you give us this budget approval, then we'll have some seed capital to help make that possible. You can't go into a donor.
Just answer my questions, please.
Okay.
Sorry, just because in the interest of giving everybody time, you said that you wanted to dispel the myth that you wanted to do more than fix up old buildings. The number one goal of the park department, the park board, and your group is to develop a signature park that the community can use, where you have $250,000 in the first year allocated towards a community park, but everything I've read, and I'm not being critical, I just want to know the answer to the question, if you get $75 million in bond funds, plus another $8 million a year on top of what you're getting now, there's still not anything that you're going to allocate towards a signature park. How can you say it's the number one priority of the foundation if there's not any money going towards it?
Sir, that's not true. For the signature park, for the community park along Cullen Boulevard, we've allocated $3 million in the year 2019. Prior to that, to do conceptual planning, it's $250,000. I think we can do a credible conceptual plan for that. Now, do we have the $30 to $35 million it will cost for that signature park in the budget? No. We've got to go raise that money from private sources.
Okay, I'll take you at face value. I guess here's where I'm getting to this. One of the things I've been frustrated in this process is you and I have had 3 meetings, and I said, Mr. Human, I will do my best job, and I'll list you, here's my 7 things that need to get done to get my buy-in on this project, one of which was a signature community park. Right now, if we do this, we're going to spend $3.5 million in city money to go to the Cotton Bowl for the plaza in front. We're going to spend $2 million paving around the music hall, $3.1 million to fix the swine building, and $400,000 on the old mill inn that never makes a profit. But yet we can't put any money whatsoever towards actually building a signature park. So in the 5 years to 10 years, or however long it takes to get the signature park finally funded, which says it's the number one priority, but it's more like not the number one priority, then all the citizens who live around the area are going to get is the same that they've always gotten. How do you reconcile turning over that much city funding when your number one priority is not funding the city park?
Are you asking for the foundation to absolutely guarantee, after 30 years of non-performance on the city of Dallas, that we magically will be able to raise quickly $30 million and tell you today
No, sir, that's not what I'm...
That money is available?
No, sir, that's not what I'm asking you. What I'm asking you is if we're going to give you $8 million more a year than we're currently putting into Fair Park, and you're going to ask us for $75 million in bond funding, what I'm asking you is to make that park a priority. And right now, I understand you have to get money in private funding. I get that. I also get, where you'll say like priority 3 and priority 4 that the private sector is going to do. All I'm asking is, if we're going to say it's a number one priority, it needs to be a number one priority. And spending $9 million on the Cotton Bowl Plaza, swine building, old mill inn.
I'm sorry, sir, that there's no increase. I have asked for no increase for the Cotton Bowl. None. That is carryover funding. The only thing is a marketing specialist that spends all day long in trying to fill that Cotton Bowl and better utilize it. If you look at the numbers there on Cotton Bowl,
sir,
it starts at $2.08 million
Mr. Human,
and stays at 2.
go ahead and let Mr. Clayton speak.
I'm looking at the numbers you guys gave me. You said a priority A need that if you get the city's money is $3.5 million to go to the paving of the front area of the Cotton Bowl. And I can come back to that. I guess my point is there's $9 million that I found that if we're really going to engage the community, I think we should shift the focus and apply $9 million towards a signature park, which can actually break concrete, as opposed to fixing the swine building, the old mill inn, and the Cotton Bowl area, and the paving around the music hall, before we do something that actually shows ground being broken for the citizens. That's all I'm asking. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Grayson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi, Walt.
Hi.
Hi. And we are not going to beat you up. We're just going to ask some questions.
Sure,
Okay.
great.
Okay. I was also looking at the capital needs inventory, and the yellow highlighted sections, are those the ones that will be done, attempted to be done out of that first $75 million? Maybe Mr. Winters could answer that.
Hang on just a second. Let me get the mic.
Ms. Grayson, the sections in yellow, the highlight that if you're looking at this document,
Yes.
does that look familiar? Those do not indicate when the projects will be done or what priority they're in. Those indicate basically that this is our own internal code of items that came from our longstanding needs inventory. So this is just an internal mechanism for us to keep track of
It's an internal
things.
park department list of the things you think are the most important?
No, ma'am, they're not.
No.
These are just off of our updated Fair Park needs inventory, and we're differentiating them from items that came from the resident institutions that they brought to our attention and Mr. Human's attention that are not color-coded, and they also are
why are the
differentiated.
yellow ones highlighted, Willis? Why are the yellow ones, why are some of them highlighted in yellow? That indicated to me a priority.
Okay, well,
No?
It does not, it's not a priority. Those do not, the color doesn't indicate a priority.
Sandy.
It was used just internally so we could keep track of different requests from different sources.
May I answer it this way, and also for Mark's good question? This needs inventory is prepared by the Park Department. They brought in an independent consultant, and that just deals with existing assets. Has nothing to do with new projects like the Children's Park or greening up part of the Music Green or doing a whole host of other new things. This
Okay.
is just taking that.
Okay, I think that was like confusing. However, let me just say that as I looked through the capital needs inventory, I saw about $20 million for parking lot repair, repaving of parking lots.
Right.
Which I guess I've got to say, I would hope that that is not going to be one of our priorities. I think we should tear up those parking lots and use them for a park, because
I agree, and I agree.
Because-
And what that is why I asked them to put this in priorities. And I think if you look at the parking lots, that is not in a priority 1, 2, or even 3, except in unusual cases. And so that is the last expenditure if we have public funds to fund it. And then I did have a very small amount of about $2 million for critical items that come up and we don't have bond funding to pay for it.
well, I'm glad I asked, because that helped clear that up for me, because I surely didn't want to see us spending money to repave parking lots. As a matter of fact, if we're going to repave parking lots, I think that ought to be a state fair expenditure and not a city expenditure, because they're the ones that use the parking lots. I did want to talk about the size of the park. I tend to agree that so far what we've seen in terms of the park pushing back the park toward the lagoon, I don't think that's big enough. I just don't. I think that, you compare it to Clyde Warren, Walt, but that's a smaller area. I mean, this is 277 acres, so I think we can contain a much larger park within that 277 acres. So I would like to see a bigger park proposed. And then also, I am concerned about the funding. In many other instances, fixing things up depends on bond dollars and city dollars, but you're saying you want to raise private funds for the park. And really, the way it reads to me is that unless those private funds are forthcoming, we will not have a park. And so why not make that a priority? And also the language in there that says that the park is the park board's top priority. Why don't we make it, and I think Mr. Clayton said that, the foundation's top priority?
It is.
So that we know that there's unanimity, I think I said that right, about that's what people want. They want that park.
Sure.
So that's one of my concerns, and I am a little concerned about the fact that the city would spend $50 million in bond funds, if I read this correctly, before any private funds would start being expended. Because in the first tranche of bond sales, you guys don't have to have any private money. It's $25 million, second tranche $25 million, and then yours kicks in. No?
No. First 25 is a city.
Right.
And my thought there was to address those critical items, safety, security. Now, unfortunately, that 25 has grown to 32 million. Okay. So after that, then it is an equal matching.
Yeah, but not until the city spends the next 25 million tranche.
Well, not necessarily. That 25 million doesn't get spent until our 25 million gets raised.
So on the second tranche of funds for the first bond program,
Right.
and none of us will probably be around here for the second bond program, so I don't think we can bind that. But on that first one, it says 25 million city, nothing foundation. Second tranche, 25 million city, 25 million foundation. So you're saying that after we spend $25 million, if the bond program passes, then we'll get 25 million from private dollars before we spend the second tranche of 25 million, right?
That's right.
That's not how I read it.
Right. See, first 25, city. Second 25, foundation raised 25. And if they do that, then that next tranche of 25 gets spent on existing buildings, not on new projects. And then the third tranche, foundation, matching, city funding.
Okay, and I also want to mention in relation to the bond program, and I think you and I will disagree about this, Walt, I want to see this be a standalone proposition in the bond proposal and not rolled up into other park items. I think there should be park proposition and then a fair park proposition. So I'm not going to be supportive of bond dollars unless it's a separate proposition in the bond program for fair park.
Sandy, would you clarify that? In other words, I understand what you're saying about the priority of what we call the family park along Cullen Boulevard. That's what you're referring to, not the overall park.
We got it.
I'm
It's just the way. It's just the way that it's going to be on the
No,
ballot.
I'm talking about anything
okay.
related
Okay,
to
it's
your
just way on the
proposal
ballot.
with Fair Park is going to be I would hope, a separate proposition. Unlike neighborhood parks and other things that the park department has on their needs inventory list, I'm going to want to see it as a separate bond proposition. To indicate fully the city's support for it.
Got it.
Okay? Let's see, I'm running out of time. I've got another question here.
We can come back around.
Yeah, but then I only get 5 minutes,
No,
so I'm going to take the
I'm going to
rest
be a
of my-
little
I'm
bit
gonna
more flexible.
Take the rest of my time.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
I didn't see anything in here with the State Fair contract. We had all these other things, South Dallas Fair Park Trust Fund. We had all this background information, but the page was blank under State Fair contract. So my question on that is that when is it in effect until, Walt? How long does the State Fair contract that is currently in effect, how long does that last?
2028.
2028.
Right.
So, can anything change about what's currently done with the State Fair until 2028? Do we have to wait that long before we can change anything?
No.
No.
Absolutely not. And as I've said repeatedly, I have had absolutely terrific support and discussions with the State Fair. I am totally confident that they will do what they said they would do, and that is, now that they realize the big picture, they're going to put on a Fair Park hat in addition to their State Fair hat. What I mean by that is to look broader than the boundaries of just the State Fair. The children's park, the family park, the grand park, when that was suggested at the park board meeting on May 5th, there was one big pushback at all from anyone in the State Fair about, well, you've pushed the paywall back. I'm hoping through good consensus planning between the State Fair and the Foundation that we can push that paywall back to maybe even the lagoon, like former chairman.
Not big enough. Okay,
Okay,
I know
so
what you
in other
said.
words,
Not big enough.
The answer is yes. I am very confident that we do not have to wait for 2028. There's a lot that can be done.
Thank you. I'll save the rest of my questions. I only have 24 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grayson. Mr. Griggs.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for our wonderful City of Dallas staff, our park board staff, and to you, Mr. Human, for all your hard work on this agreement. My first question is about the board members on the foundation. I would really like to see all Dallas residents on there. Everyone who...
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
I would like to see all Dallas residents on the board.
All
is
but
what I would
one.
like to...
All but one.
If not, I would like a promise from that person within a year of going on the board, he'll move to Dallas. It's a great place to live. I'd also like to see more people from Southern Dallas. I think over time, the City of Dallas, the State Fair, have failed Fair Park, both of them. And
I agree with that.
one reason is because we need to have more representation from the neighborhood. We need to have more people in Southern Dallas on this board. For me, having just one or two is not enough. I'd like to see at least 4 people on the board, and I think there's more than 4 in Southern Dallas. Many more than that could do it. So I'd like to know why only the requirement of 1, and why only have 2 people from Southern Dallas on this board. Why not increase the number of people on Southern Dallas on this board?
The Park Board edicted that at least 1 would be from the surrounding community. We recruited 2. But in addition, I created the advisory board to do just exactly what you're talking about. And now there are 4 additional people that are going to be sitting around that horseshoe when we deliberate. So that's 6 out of 20.
If I want them to have a vote, I want the people of Southern Dallas and the 4 people that I would like them to all to live in the South Dallas neighborhood to have a seat at the big table, not at the other table, the big table. Your seat's at the big table. You've got a seat at the big table, and the community does too, because it's just strange. You write an agreement, and you have this, and the Park Cities have as many seats as the people that live around Fair Park in South Dallas. And to me, that's not right. We need more people from South Dallas, from Southern Dallas on this board. That's the way you build a community. You've got to get that kind of buy-in. It can't be just, it can't be people coming down, crossing the river, and going back home. I want some people before the meeting and after meeting go to their home, and they're staying on one side of the river. That's what makes things work. That's what makes this Dallas City Council work. That's what makes this city work. And that's what's been missing from Fair Park. So I think if we give that a try, we'd find out it would work. My next issue would be, I'm going to touch on the State Fair contract. I really believe that all excess revenue that the State Fair brings in needs to go into the buildings that the State Fair is maintaining. The State Fair of Texas is getting a huge windfall in this agreement. I go through all the priorities. I see all these buildings that are, some of them exclusively used by the State Fair, some nearly exclusively used by the State Fair, some used by the State Fair mostly. And then the City of Dallas taxpayers are asked to fix up the buildings in their entirety. I would like to see in the agreement with the State Fair, and I think now's the time that we could change this while we have a very public process, that the State Fair of Texas uses its excess revenue to fix up these buildings that only the State Fair uses.
Guys, I appreciate every once in a while applauding's good, but let's not do it. Let's just keep going.
I'll try to make so the remarks aren't such a hit. I'll try to switch sides and some positions.
We could do
That's
like
what I'll
this.
do. Then we could do that.
We could do like this.
We could do that. I'm sorry, man. I don't want to outshine you.
We got a lot
It's
to do.
all right. So my next issue would be on transparency. I know, Mr. Human, you value transparency and accountability as much or more than I do. And so on that issue, why not have this foundation embrace all of the Texas Open Meetings Act, not just the minimum of having to respond to public information requests? Why not open up your meetings and even take it one step further? Just record your meetings and put them up at DallasCityHall.com on the website. It makes for much better government. And one aspect of what we have going on right now with the public is the public lacks trust in the way the City of Dallas and the State Fair of Texas have run Fair Park for so many years. Why don't you help to pull back that veil, pull back that curtain, and show that we can have trust and accountability and accept all the Texas Open Meetings Act, and even go one step to record your meetings?
You want a response?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. First of all, we're subject to the Open Records Act. And so everything that we do is subject to scrutiny. Number two, all of the proceedings of those board meetings will be made public, put on our website so everyone can see. Third, we're following in good company. That is, the zoo, Clyde Warren Park, the Arboretum, do not have board meetings in which all of the press and all of the public can participate. We don't have kind of logistics or the security resources. But what we would like to do, and I present to our board when it is convened, is to have at least one meeting a year that's open to the total public. And it's not just where you have an open meeting where there's silence on the part of the press and the public, but actually it's a two-way dialogue. So we give an annual report, and then basically we see what the community has to think, and from all quarters. So.
Well, for me, that doesn't take it far enough. If there's nothing to hide, then I think you should open up all the meetings. Being subject to just the open records request versus all of TOMA is a big distinction. And so even though other groups haven't done it, I know that you realize the politics are much different with this. This issue is much different, and would be a great opportunity to lead. I would ask, at a minimum, would you agree to putting in a no-excuse open records plan, so when people file open records requests, you don't claim everything under the sun as proprietary, trade secret, economic data, secret with the City of Dallas, secret with the State Fair of Texas?
That's our present stand. Obviously, we want to be transparent, and we are.
Would you put that in writing then? If I propose
It is in
some
writing.
language in there, would you support
we
that?
have in Section 904 of the agreement our subjection to the Open Records Act.
Then would you rather?
Yeah,
are you willing to put in a no excuse section?
Right.
You're probably familiar with that
What I just
concept.
committed to, we'd put that in writing as well. Sure.
So you have it in there?
But not be subject to the Open Meeting Act with all the unintended consequences that requires.
The unintended consequence of having the public involved is never a bad thing. It's a fantastic thing. So I disagree with you on that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go on the next subject.
I understand that.
Now, Mr. Human, looking at your priorities, under priority 1, how many dollars are going to the park?
Priority 1, are you talking about in the needs
Capital
assessment?
improvement plan, yes. Exhibit,
needs
I think it's 303.
That's 32 million has been identified by the park department and their consultant.
Going for the signature park element.
Oh, Signature Park.
Under priority 1.
Right. $250,000 is what I had in there in 2017.
Priority 2.
Priority 2.
Is there any money in priority 2? It's
mean
the
for
second
the
column
next-
adjacent to priority 1 column.
Yeah. In the next phase, 2017, you up the amount, and new projects goes to $1 million.
For the signature park.
Sir,
For the signature park.
for the Signature Park and other new improvements in Fair Park. In other words, we have the opportunity perhaps
Why don't
to
you
take
move
the
that to
science
priority
place
1?
and convert it to a planetarium and an information
Why don't we
center.
move the signature park to priority 1? Make it the most important thing. People want a park, and they want the walls taken down, and they want to visit this park. And I hear you say the park is the most important thing to you, it's the most important thing to the board, all this. But then, I mean, there's the saying, you got to put your money where your mouth is. So we need to move the money for the park to priority 1. It needs to be at the top of the list.
I can say it. I have said it. It is priority 1. We're
Then-
going to go and try to develop.
Then make it
this
more
quick.
than 250,000. Put it in there. Put 250,000 plus the money to get things started. Make the whole thing the reality. Make it a top priority. And I'll have more in round two. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Griggs. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Want to thank Willis and staff for the briefing and Ms. Human for your work on this. First, I want to make a few comments. Historically, there's been a lack of trust within the African American community in the city of Dallas, and specifically the Fair Park, South Dallas community. And because of that, there's a healthy skepticism about this agreement. There's been a lot of lip service and not much true service to the community. And because of that, it's really important that you continue listening. You listen to us, but you listen specifically to those who live in the Fair Park, South Dallas community. My first question is, you talked about the zoo in Clyde Warren Park. How is this agreement similar, and then how is it different from those agreements?
How is our agreement different from
Right.
Clyde Warren Park?
And the zoo.
I'm sorry, sir.
And the zoo. The zoo.
What?
The Dallas
The
Zoo.
Dallas Zoo. Well, the Dallas Zoo has about a $14 million annual fee that they're being paid plus. And Clyde Warren Park basically is self-funded. And they're surrounded by buildings, and they have a tax increment financing situation where they're providing some of their funding. We don't have that option around Fair Park in that you have it primarily residential neighborhoods.
Okay. My next question is about, with this agreement, MWBE. There was an amendment that was submitted by my park board member regarding this. Where are we currently on the status of MWBE? And then I have a couple of other questions on those ones.
Good question. All of Fair Park employs about 300 people full-time. The foundation, when it becomes operating, has about 48 employees, and we hope over the next 3 years to increase that by another 42. So we have 90 new individuals in the park, so that's an employment opportunity. Secondly, if the bond funding comes through, then there will be improvements in the buildings so that contracts for the MWBE type activity. And I would say this, as I mentioned in the slides earlier, I think we can beat the city of Dallas in terms of its performance and the good faith effort.
Is there a certain percentage that you said you believe you can beat it, a certain percentage in those areas that you would like to see in this agreement?
Well, we will conform in spirit and in fact to the bid process that the city of Dallas has agreed to. And what I was saying is I think we can do better.
Okay, and there's a document that Mr. Jenkins and I have been discussing. I'd like to meet with you on that regarding MWBE. And my last question is, how can you assure the residents, many of them who are here, many of them I know go to church in South Dallas community, how can you assure that with this development, the South Dallas Fair Park community and residents benefit from it?
How can we ensure that they...
How can you assure that they will benefit from this
Okay.
development?
Number one is that if the city, if you agree for those additional funds coming in on the main corridors, MLK, East Grand, and so forth, that will do a tremendous amount in that community for revitalizing some of those businesses along those corridors. Number two, I just mentioned that we do have employment opportunities and also contract opportunities, and that without violating, I guess, the law, that we would be open to contracts and start basically in those communities and work out and see if there are skills available in those that can be employed. They're all open, and we will publish this, and hopefully in a job fair we'll have good feedback from the community itself.
There's something, the SM Wright project that they've put together where they've trained a number of people and offered training for a number of people in the South Dallas community to be able to go to work. Would you be willing to create opportunities in whatever type of development to take place for the residents of South Dallas community to be able to be trained and also to work to improve their own community.
Right. I endorse what you just said, and then I want to mention one other thing. I hope that we can attract some other partners like we did in Jubilee Park into the MLK, Mill City, and Dolphin Heights, because they've got great leadership locally there, but they need money and they need more volunteers to come into that community and address the community in a comprehensive way. You can't just come in and build a few houses. It's got to be anti-crime, housing, employment, economic development, and that's what we're trying to do in Jubilee Park.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Ms. Gates.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you all. Thanks for coming and presenting this, just and all your hard work leading up to today. I have a couple questions, and I think some of them might you be able to address, and then I think I may need some from Willis. I think we all have to kind of step back and say, what were we trying to do with this agreement? What this agreement is, and what is how it's going to help us. What are our goals for this new agreement when it's in place, and what it doesn't do. And I think we as a city are wanting it to be the solution for the revitalization of the whole South Dallas, or are we wanting it, or the neighborhoods around, or are we just looking to be able to properly manage Fair Park? So I think that's kind of a discussion, and a question directly at Willis. It came out of these visions in the past, or what are you wanting to achieve with this agreement?
What I'd like to achieve is, first of all,
I want Willis.
She asked Willis.
And I can't see Willis, so it's hard. And I can't tell if he's looking or not looking. But what were you trying to achieve with this agreement? Bringing a vision to that we've seen from the mayor's task force to fruition, or were you trying to revitalize the community, or why did you start seeking that we needed to get to where we are today?
Yeah. Ms. Gates, going back to the broad goals established by the Mayor's Fair Park Task Force, I think was definitely the starting point. And they identified that Fair Park was inadequately funded and needed additional funding.
Willis, we're going to ask you to step up there. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is hard. It's hard to when you can.
We've got a lot of papers all spread out here separately. So going back to the Mayor's Fair Park Task Force, they were charged with examining the future of Fair Park. There was, I think, a perception that there was a disorganization from all of the different institutions and different contracts reporting to different city departments. For example, there were 3 different city departments that had authority and responsibilities at Fair Park. And I think there was a very strong desire to consolidate all of those authorities and responsibilities under one organization with one umbrella. And I think that's what this contract gives us the opportunity to do. There was also a lot of talk about Fair Park reaching its full potential for the South Dallas Fair Park neighborhood and also for the entire city and the region. Fair Park is a visitor and venue park, an activity and event park, more than it is a community park. And I think there was a very strong desire, which we support, to transform park, to find the balance between visitors and the community.
And you think this helps us do that?
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then currently, how much money, I know we have revenues associated with the expenses that the city expends currently in Fair Park, but so net, what are we expending minus the revenues? What's it costing? I know it does. The revenues are not supporting what it costs to run the park.
Correct.
So right now we spend about.
Right now, the city's budget, both Park Department, EBS, and Office of Cultural Affairs, is about $11.19 million. That's a total budget. Of that amount, the majority, the big majority of that is the Park and Recreation Department, about $10.7 million. So, in addition to that, there are some revenues that come in
that offset that expenses.
Pardon?
That offset some of this $10 million. Or not.
So Park Department is $10.7 million,
right.
The total, including Office of Cultural Affairs, cultural program funding, and utilities
Is all 11.1?
is 11.19.
But do we have any revenues that help?
We do. We have revenues.
About 10.65.
Yeah, our revenues are about 2.27 million. Right, next year they're going to go up a little bit because we have additional revenues coming in from rentals and leases. So those revenues will also be retained by the foundation. So the foundation, the first year management fee, if you don't prorate it because it's going to start January 1st versus October 1st, would be comparing it to the 11.19 million. The foundation management fee would be, let's call it 16.7 million. And then, of course, we prorated out the first quarter. So that's an increase of about $5.5 or $5.6 million to the foundation. That allows them to hire more staff. We have about 58 staff total at Fair Park. It probably needs to be 2 or 3 times that to adequately manage and operate and maintain Fair Park.
So
for
it's
example, let
costing
me
us
give you
more.
one example. We have one electrician, one plumber, 2 electricians for 1.9 million square feet of buildings and a 92,000 seat stadium. The foundation would greatly increase those kinds of maintenance staffs. Also, we have no marketing department at Fair Park, no development department. The foundation, this increase in budget allows them to do that.
Okay, Mr. Human, now I think I have some questions for you. So the goal was to help with the management, not because you see that we have weakness and we haven't been properly managing the property. I mean, I that's what I believe too, is that we're not managing it well currently. We don't have good oversight of our current contracts.
Ms. Gates, I think we do a heck of a job with
for the little
11.1
resources,
million.
but that's explaining why it's going to cost us a lot more under this new proposal. So why the escalating costs? Why can't, if we're going to be able to maximize the rentals and make it more successful, why are you asking us to pay more in management fees over time?
There's no reason why we can't make them more productive, but first you've got to get them into leasable condition, the existing buildings you're talking about, but new venues, new projects and activities, basically.
Right, but I understand where you're asking. That would be in the capital expenses, but just the pure management, it's going to cost, you have an escalating management cost. So shouldn't you have escalating revenues going associated with the park going forward?
Yes, but everyone that I have talked to, and they have said, what we would like the park to be is a place for people. And so you don't charge people to use that space right there for picnic or for quiet enjoyment is the way I describe it. So it's a blend between revenue-generating functions and places to really make, as many of the people are correctly saying, make it a signature park that is known throughout the nation. This community park that we're talking about here along Cullen Boulevard, that's free and accessible. And it has to be operated and maintained properly.
All right, a couple more questions because I'm running out of time. Why have you guaranteed that we're going to protect all the current employees? How was that negotiated? Like unlike the zoo where they said everybody's going to have to reapply.
Why have we guaranteed what?
That all the current employees related to Fair Park are retaining their jobs.
Well, my assessment in talking to the management is that we've got a good cadre of employees who are understaffed and underfunded. But I thought it was the best of both worlds.
Okay.
We'd like to attract them, but if they don't want to come, they have a job in the park department.
And then when you talked about a performance plan, and I think it was on page 16, when do you see that you will create a performance plan with metrics? When will that be made public?
Okay, good question. So in 2017, we would develop the indicators and how you're going to measure the indicators. It is a slam dunk to provide financials. Auditors can do that, accountants and so forth. It is more difficult to count visitors. The State Fair can count visitors. The music hall can count visitors. But what about you and your family coming out there on a Sunday afternoon and going to the park? Seems to me we need to count those people too. So how do you do that? And so this first year, 2017, you not only identify the indicators, but the devices and the systems to measure performance. And so then in 2018, you have a baseline year of those indicators, and you measure that. And that's the baseline to measure performance from.
So we won't see it until after a year? is what-
2019.
Okay.
will be the
And then,
performance plan.
I mean, I think we're really at a crossroads right now because I think what we're doing now is not working. We all want status quo to change. We're not taking advantage of the acreage that's there, and it's not providing the kind of amenities that I think the citizens want in the area and outside of the area. We just have to, decide, is this the best way to make that happen? I mean, is it a foundation? I mean, I think we need new management. I think we're all in agreement that we've got to, we can't continue to do it under the Parks Department because there's not enough resources there. We just want to make sure that it happens in the best way, that we get the kind of things in the mayor's task force plan, like the park that we all really, really want, and that we want to make happen, and that we can, and do it in a transparent manner. So I would only ask them, down to my last few seconds, and I'll have a second round, but that we come up with ways. And I know you're not a government entity, and you're not subject to you're subject to open records, but not necessarily open meetings. There's not any groups out there that are not government agencies that are subject to that. Right. And you'd have to have a whole nother kind of department running that. But that there's ways that we can make sure that we have the kind of input from the public. If it's 2 meetings a year, I'd like to see something like that in the agreement, that we could all come together and that you could, talk about these performance review and what's happening, that we can make sure it's happening in an extremely transparent way. So with that, I'll finish up and keep my rest of my questions for the next round.
Thank you, Ms.
Mayor.
Gates. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Winters. Thank you, Mr. Human, for your presentation. I just want to start with, Mr. Human, your presentation, slide 11, if you would. There's been some discussion about not having community input, and I just had a question on the creation of the neighborhood charrette and park design. This gets into the park being first. I'd like to hear something about a date or a timeline as to when this will be created and how long it will be in effect before that can become a reality.
For the community
And community engagement for the park.
community engagement,
Yes.
there's no reason why we shouldn't start that in year one.
Okay. That was quick.
And I'd appreciate any help. And also the various associations and the neighborhood organizations can help stimulate and act as the catalyst to make that happen.
Okay, I'm glad you said that, because that leads me to my next one. Going to the advisory board, again, I would like to see that either at least 4 members live in South Dallas and have the South Dallas zip code, and to ensure that they're from the community. That, again, we just don't have someone flying in saying that they live there, that the individuals live in the community, so that they're on the advisory board, so they have a voice at the table. Okay.
They do.
All right.
So
And
we
again,
got 6, 2 on the board of directors and 4 on the advisory board.
3 to 4 on the board of directors. 4 people on that board. All right. And again, could you reiterate to me how we plan to follow the city's bid process?
How what?
How we're going to follow the city's bid process for NWBE?
In terms of the time that they occupy the park?
No requirements in terms of the percentage, I guess, Mr. Winters.
Councilmember, we've got the BID is specifically mentioned in about 5 sections
Right.
in the contract, so we do have it in there, I think, pretty solidly. It requires them to address MWBE throughout all their contracting with the city,
Okay,
to meet the city's goals.
I just wanted that to be reiterated because there was some discussion about that was not brought up and that was not part of the process, and
And
hopefully,
Councilman, that's also in a performance indicator.
okay, hopefully that some of those subcontractors will apply to become general contractors and not subcontractors. So, wanted to reiterate that. On page 13 of your plan, Mr. Human. sorry, slide 13. Talk about
Page
the development
13.
of the 12-month marketing plan. How, Mr. Winters, for our parks department, are our parks a large generator of revenue? Just the parks themselves?
For the park system?
Park system, yes.
Yes, we have considerable revenue each year, Mr. Wilson, that we contribute to the city's general fund, and also we retain a small portion of it to fund improvements in the park system.
Because it seems to me we're down to two different views, and we agree that as a city we have not done a great job in managing Fair Park. I think everyone agrees that. No disrespect to the hardworking citizens, but we've not done a great job of marketing ourselves and ensuring that we take full access or make full access of the potential of Fair Park. So we agree that the city of Dallas is not doing the best, but it appears that we're either deciding, as it was said before, you so stated that we're not talking about buildings or we're talking about a park. So the two different sides is who's building a park and who's building buildings. Now, if you look at what it will take, I don't hear anything, speaking of the parks, I didn't hear anything about a fence. There was some discussion about the fence options. Could you speak upon that? Whether the fence should be taken down to open up the park, or should we maintain the fence to better for our metrics to be able to count the number of individuals that come through?
Yeah, really on the issue of fencing, that's very important. When we built the Jubilee Park, we coalesced the neighbors and their children, and what they determined is it should be an open park, but it should be protected. And so the chain link, the wrought iron fence that we built was, from the mom's standpoint, that it was a protection mechanism, and also we had guys come out there at 2 a.m. in the morning and do wheelies on the middle of our park after we spent a lot of money in facilitizing putting grass in. Also, if you talk to the gentleman, Mr. Thompson, who is the head of security at Fair Park, he says that there are a lot of people that would like to cut through in high speed across Fair Park. So this is a way to answer your question, that moving the paywall back from where it is now on Cullen Boulevard is profoundly important. It makes it free and accessible to the people, and you can create more pedestrian entries into that present fence. But when we do the design charrette, we're going to have to really talk about the safety of kids. Kicking a soccer ball out into Cullen Boulevard is an issue, and so we really need to address that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Who is representing the city in this negotiation?
I'm sorry, would you?
Who is representing the city in this negotiation?
The city attorney and the park department staff.
Specifically, who in the attorney's office?
Christine Lanners and Connie Tankersley.
Great. Can I get drafts and revisions to this agreement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if there's red lines, I'd love to see red lines with the metadata. The reason I ask is because I think that this draft has some provisions that really favor the foundation as over and against the city, and even separate and apart from the question of whether we're going to have private management, I'd like to have the provisions be as city-friendly as possible. At the in the whereases, the precatory language of the contract, it states that Section 252002 of the Government Code, that this type of agreement has an exception to open procurement. So can someone explain to me why this doesn't have to be bid or RFQ'd?
Mr. Kingston, I'm going to ask the city attorney to address that question.
Hi, I'm Christine Lanners, one of the assistant city attorneys. City is not required to competitively bid this agreement because it qualifies under one of the exemptions under state law 252.022, specifically section F. And that section provides that management services provided by a nonprofit organization to a municipal park to which the organization provided significant financial or other benefit does not have to go through the competitive bid process.
And what has the foundation contributed? It's not prospective. It's not a prospective language.
I believe that's a question more appropriate for staff. For the benefit. What is the benefit? The benefit. What benefit does this bring? What is the benefit?
I want to make sure I understand the question, Mr. Kingston.
I'm not entirely sure it is a question for you, Willis. The issue is, for us to be able to get out of our own bidding procedures, actually not our own, the ones enforced on us by the state, there has to be, first don't we also have to have an ability to do this in our charter? But regardless, if we're going to do it, they have to have provided something significant in terms of, it, like Clyde Warren, there was the money, you know? I think that has to happen before we launch off into this, is my theory.
I think the benefit in this case would be the exemption says financial or other benefit. So one could make the argument that other benefit would be this organization operating and privately managing Fair Park, just like the zoo and Clyde Warren and the Arboretum.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with that. I think that open government requires sunshine and it requires competition. We always do better when we have competition. If the management of this entity is in such disarray, then I can't help but think that there could be as many as a dozen groups who might come together to submit proposals for improving it. Page 11 of the agreement, Ms. Lanners, I'd love to see, if we're going to have a management fee, then we probably ought to pay that monthly. I don't care to let anybody else use our float. Page 12 of that agreement, Ms. Lanners, the bond match that the foundation is required to raise in order to get the city's bond funding can be non-cash equivalents. That's completely unacceptable. The donation from a benefactor of, for instance, his prized possession of antique automobiles simply cannot leverage the city asking voters to go into debt. So that's going to have to be cash on the barrelhead, in my opinion. On page 14, the foundation purports to put itself under, for future cultural and artistic activities at the park, put itself under the Office of Cultural Affairs system for determining where that money goes and who gets it. My question is the Cultural Affairs Commission going to get to vote on that?
Yes, sir. Mr. Kingston, my understanding is that the recommendation will go to the Cultural Affairs Commission. They will approve it or vote on it and then forward it to the foundation with their recommendation.
So why are we moving money twice? Why not just send it through the Cultural Affairs Commission and then we fund it?
Mr. Kingston. The reason is I think the foundation wants to hold the resident institutions and cultural institutions to have performance measures with them as well, and wants to be able to utilize funding for them to
But
implement.
if they're not in control of the funding, then it's just moving money twice. Or do they purport to change the outcome of a Cultural Affairs Commission vote?
I can answer that. We ask that the Cultural Affairs Agency review and stack up these cultural institutions against other institutions that City of Dallas is supporting, and that we would take that recommendation. And our proposal was that we determine ultimately we have to spend the $1.3 million a year to those residential institutions, which is what they're getting now. And but that we should have the authority, if we're going to try to bring everyone together and to try to influence those organizations with long-term, no-cut contracts. That is one piece of help that we can get to get everyone acting as a management team.
I didn't understand anything you just said, and I'm not
Okay,
trying to be
let me
rude.
start
What I
this
asked was, I'm really not trying to be rude, but I don't understand that at all. If we're going to move this money twice, what's the point unless it's to give the foundation the ability to change a Cultural Affairs Commission vote? Is that what you intend to do?
Early on, we debated whether to leave all of the institution funding in the City of Dallas or have the foundation assume that obligation. In the contract, we've assumed $1.3 million, okay? And that basically once a year, those organizations come to us after they have gone through the screen of the Cultural Affairs Agency and basically ask for subsidy. And it seems to us that we need some, in effect, performance review and control over those organizations so that they can be helped and nurtured.
Okay. On the performance plan, which shows up on page 16, is the park board going to get to vote on the acceptance of the performance plan?
Yes, sir. Park board will review, and it's subject to written approval by the park board on the performance plan.
Cool. Perfect. I think that that's a really healthy transparency aid on this thing. If things are so broken out there and we have one department for the front of the door and another department for the inside of the door, shouldn't the management payment go down over time? I mean, aren't y'all just basically going to substantially streamline and make the management of the park more efficient?
I proposed earlier on November 13th basically a strategy that did just that, but the park board and the budget director cut that back from $25 million flat to $17 million per year. And what I'm
but my
saying
question
is,
is,
that
Mr. Human,
$17
shouldn't you
million
be
is
able
just
to
a
do it
bear
for
to
less
get
than
by.
12 million? Mr. Human, please.
Yes, sir.
Shouldn't you be able to do this job for less than $12 million? I mean, what you told us is that we're wasting $12 million on inefficient operations and an organizational model that simply doesn't work. Yours is supposed to be excellent. The reason you're being recommended to us is because of your management experience. So shouldn't you be able to do this for less?
If you had funded it adequately for the last 30 or 40 years, the answer would be yes, but you haven't. There's a hill to climb in Fair Park. Outside donations have dried up because of the city's lack of financial commitment. We can talk about it any way you want, but it finally comes down to money.
Thank you, Mr. Human. He's out of time, and
Okay.
you're taking his out of time.
Well, maybe I don't understand the management fee versus the capital expenditure request, because those are generally two different things. Management fees are prospective. It's the capital expenditures that were meant to climb the hill, as you say. And if those are being confused, then I have severe concern about the trajectory of this project. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Kingston. Mr. McGue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank you too, Mr. Human, for all your efforts over this time period. I'm optimistic about the process just generally. There's a lot of people in this room I see that I respect, some wearing red shirts, some wearing green shirts, and I love this level of participation in this, and I think we're going to end up with a result that's better than where we started. So I appreciate your work on this so far. I want to start with the performance plan and some of the performance measures mentioned specifically in section 1.01B. And let me also take a moment too to discuss or to thank the park board. We watched a lot of the changes that took place, and I am thankful for almost each and every one of those edits that was made. And so it's always good when the board comes together and puts a lot of effort behind this, and I want to appreciate that as well. So when we talk about the performance plans and the performance objectives, and I saw in the presentation specifically on page 7 where it talks about stimulate economic growth throughout investment in Fair Park and the surrounding community. And so my first question is, what performance objectives do we have or does the foundation have for economic development and or public safety improvements in the areas surrounding Fair Park?
Mr. McGue, there are no specific performance objectives that address economic development because it was, as far as the park board is concerned, it's outside the boundaries of Fair Park, and so they were focused totally within the boundaries of Fair Park.
Okay, so understanding that, why would we not want to include a performance metric that impacted the economic development surrounding what's in the 277 acres of Fair Park?
Well, I think part of the answer would be the foundation is focused on, again, Fair Park. It would be difficult if they don't have the funding to have an impact, a dramatic impact on anything that happens outside of Fair Park without a lot more participation from a lot more city departments, planning, strategic initiatives, infrastructure, public works.
Can I ask you, Mr. Human, as you look at this?
I'd like to comment on that. The measurement of economic development is not an easy, it's a science, but it's an art as well. And so if you have a performance matrix of economic development, what does that mean? What is your time horizon? Is it 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? What are you going to measure? Should it be only the number of unoccupied homes and vacant lots in the surrounding area, which is one criteria you could use, that we use in Jubilee Park? The crime rate, economic vitality in there, how many small businesses are nurtured today versus in the future. But I will say that this budget that I've presented to you for 2017 through 2019, it doesn't have money in there for a study on how you would measure economic development. That's a very sophisticated, and as you probably read in the paper over the last 6 months, there's been a lot of discussion about economic development studies and how much impact there's been. So we'd have to be really thoughtful before we burden the foundation with that obligation.
I appreciate that answer, and I guess I'd defer to some of your expertise in the area to help identify some of those measures that we could include. I think one of the purposes of this revitalization of Fair Park is to support, encourage the areas around Fair Park. And when I look at the performance measures, I would like something included that at least highlighted that fact and made clear, as we've talked about from the beginning, whether it related to where we're putting the money and where we're putting the energy, that's a goal of the foundation. Okay. Let me also ask, on page 13 of the presentation, and this question has been asked a couple times already, and I just don't know if I completely understand the answer yet. But as we talk about the management fees, and also the private funding that hopefully is used to supplement what the city is putting in this, Mr. Human, do we have estimates and projected estimates of what we believe would be the amount of money that we could raise privately through the foundation?
Do I have estimates? No, I have hope and expectations. Wouldn't have committed to the family park if I didn't think that money was forthcoming. If the city performs initially and shows the outside world that things are going to be different. And I think that hopefully we'll be very surprised at additional private, non-city donations that will be forthcoming once Fair Park really gets its act together. Two main things: management and adequate funding from the public sector.
And I'm just assuming you've gone out and had discussions with potential funders and had these expectation discussions. And is there at least somewhere projected, what we think we can do the first year, third year, 5 years out, and how we're going to leverage that? I mean, we're trying to do that from the city side, and I'm trying to understand what we're leveraging on the private side.
It's a good question, Adam. The price tag for the Cullen Boulevard, the Grand Park, $30 to $40 million. If we do that, that basically almost matches what we have contractually agreed to qualify for the additional $50 million that the city would provide. So, but have we a long-term estimate of what private funding? As I said in the presentation, I think that we can outstrip the public contribution to this over time. But we have a 30 to 40-year legacy of inaction and lack of funding that has to be overcome. I mentioned to you and to the park board that at my request, the Meadows Foundation convened a group of 20 top foundations. And what they said, I was pleased on one hand that they love Fair Park, and I think they're going to be willing to help. But they said, first, city has got to basically come to the table with financing, operating and capital funding.
Okay. As we look at and discussed earlier, as we look at the revenues, the potential annual revenues from Fair Park as it currently exists and our expectations of increased revenues moving forward, why was the decision made, or why was the negotiation suggested that those revenues stay within the foundation budget and not revert back to the city?
Yeah, over time, that's a good point, and there's no reason why additional revenue shouldn't increase. The ones that we are identified that they're receiving now is parking. Potentially, sponsorships will be a very good one. Sponsorships generally involve a building and or assets there. So if we get those shaped up, we'll add some opportunities.
If I could also add to that, Mr. McGue, we currently have revenues at Fair Park, as I mentioned a moment ago, and all of that is factored into some of those revenues are used to address major maintenance items like fire alarm systems and paving problems, things like that. But also, I just wanted to point out that when we first sat down to negotiate this contract with the foundation, the original request was for a management fee range starting at $25 million, escalating to $35 million. They were negotiated down to a range of $16.7 million to $21.7 million. So we felt that because that was such a severe difference in what was requested and what we were willing to give them, that revenues allowing them to keep revenues that would go into Fair Park operations and maintenance would be acceptable.
So you're trying to offset the number in the negotiation. Is that what we're trying to do there? We took money off of the original management fee, and so we're trying to add it back through earning additional revenues? No, sir. The revenues were always part of the equation. Okay, so I guess I still don't understand then. Why would the city not want the revenues to come back to the city. I mean, if I'm negotiating a management agreement, I want them to get fully funded and be able to manage as effectively as they can, but I want the city to be able, or my business, whatever it may be, to benefit from the additional revenues.
Well, again, we felt that Fair Park needed the funding, including the revenues, to adequately operate, maintain, and manage the park.
Okay, so how does this management agreement and this work with Fair Park benefit the Parks Department or our other community parks in other areas of the city?
How does this agreement benefit the Park Department?
Yes.
It allows Fair Park to be adequately funded, again, going from $11.19 million in our current budget to a full-year funding of $16.7 million. It allows them to be Fair Park to be adequately funded for the first time.
Thank you, Willis. Thank you, Mayor. I have more for round two.
Thank you. Mr. Kleiman?
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a couple of comments and a couple of questions. First of all, this isn't really for you, but it's for my colleague Tiffany, who's kind of led the charge on this thing for a long time. Thank you very much for your hard work on this. You've shown real leadership in this. I know it hasn't been easy, but very much appreciate you taking point on this on behalf of the council and really looking out for what we can do in southern Dallas and South Dallas in particular. I also want to compliment the staff, Willis, I see over there, Daniel, John, have worked with you guys for years on Fair Park and very much appreciate your passion for it and passion for what we can do there and getting us to this point. I also want to say thanks to my park board member, Amy Monnier, and my Office of Cultural Affairs member, Lori Stahl, who's actually able to be here today, for also putting in a lot of work and effort into making sure we get an agreement that works for the city and as well for Fair Park. Let's see. I wanted to mention that for years, those of us that served on the park board have always been frustrated with the lack of organized management out there at Fair Park and recognize that that's been a problem. And I think that everybody, whatever side of whatever plan you're on, recognizes that that's kind of at the core of what we're trying to accomplish here is one organized entity that can manage the whole facility for the benefit of the city. Currently, we have a lot of organizations, and they're all rowing, but they're not rowing together. And so we're trying to bring that together, so I appreciate that. And I think part of the really inevitable goal for that, a longer-term goal, one of longer-term goals there, is 2036. So we have the Texas Bicentennial coming up. We're 20 years away. We talked about this back when we were on the park board. Making sure that Fair Park is the venue for the 2036 Texas Bicentennial and show the world what Dallas has and what Dallas can do. These are some tough decisions that we're making now, but thank goodness we're dealing with it now and not in 2030, okay? So we're going to get this thing sorted. We're going to get Fair Park back on track. We're going to show the world how fantastic of a venue we have there, and we're going to show the world how it's supported and helped the neighborhoods as opposed to being locked off and not part of the neighborhood. So I'm really excited about that. There's a lot of details in this plan. It's always in the details, but I feel firmly that we're going to get there. With regards to Fair Park and the neighborhoods, Fair Park is not the sole cause of all the challenges we have in South Dallas, but it's a contributor. And Fair Park is not the sole solution for everything that we need to do in South Dallas, but it can contribute as well. So I think that trying to blame the State Fair or Fair Park for all the concerns in South Dallas is not completely fair. But I do feel that Fair Park and the right plan can help do what even what Ms. Young is trying to do, which is just get this neighborhood improved, improve the quality of life in the neighborhood, show that the city of Dallas really does care about all its residents in many ways. So I'm excited about that. And now a couple of comments or suggestions. How am I doing? Okay.